we've thought about the wonderful planet that God prepared for mankind, and when we look around, we see it teeming with an amazing variety of life: plants, fish, birds, animals, insects, and of course a great deal of life that we can't see: bacteria, viruses, coronavirus. But it's all ultimately the handiwork of the Creator. And again, the TV nature programs have brought so much of this to our attention that we would simply never have seen in our own lives. In that wonderful psalm of praise that we just read, the psalmist speaks of the heavenly bodies that we've been thinking of, that they praise him by their existence and their obedience to his laws. And then it comes down to the earth and to the material things on the earth, the elements, fire and hail, verse 8, snow and vapors, stormy wind fulfilling his word, mountains and all hills. And then it comes to living things, fruitful trees and all cedars, beasts and all cattle, creeping things and flying fowl, and ultimately to mankind himself, kings of the earth and all people, princes and judges of the earth, young men and maidens, old men and children. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for his name alone is excellent. And right at the end of the psalm, this wonderful God of creation, who is so high above the earth, it speaks of his dealings with his saints and of the children of Israel, and his special people, a people near unto him. If you look back at Psalm 147, we quoted verse 4 in part 1. He telleth, or counts. It's the old English word to tell, as in a tally. He counts the number of the stars and calls them all by their names. But in verse 8, he covers the heavens with clouds. He prepares rain for the earth. He makes grass to grow upon the mountains. Our children are not taught that in school, are they? It's God who makes the grass to grow in their biology lessons. The grass grows from seed, it needs food, it needs water, light, and all those things, but nobody mentions that God causes it to grow. And so God has made this wonderful planet. I'll just show you one of those amazing pictures of the Earth taken from space. There are hundreds of them on the internet if you go to the NASA site or any of those. And this is a picture that we will all recognize because it focuses on the land which God's eyes are upon from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, the apple of his eye, as scripture says. And God has given the earth to the children of men, but this is a special place. We can see the Dead Sea there. Let me get the laser pointer. Here's the Dead Sea, and of course Jerusalem will be here somewhere. Here's the coast leading up to that hook in the coast, which is where Haifa is. Up here we have Lebanon and Syria. Down here we have the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez at the head of the Red Sea. We've got the Nile and the Nile Delta, and here we have the island of Cyprus. Really, I find these pictures quite amazing and instructive. But this is just how beautiful our planet is, and we're seeing it, as it were, from God's point of view. Now, I mentioned just now what our children are taught in their science lessons. Of course, science is, if you on the definition, the systematic study of the nature and behaviour of the material universe. And unfortunately, it's come to be the rule that you can only describe the material universe in terms of natural things, in terms of material. There is no room for spiritual things. For us, that science is a valid study because it studies God's creation. The medieval philosophers referred to nature as the book of nature, which stood alongside the book of the Word, the Word of God, in describing God's works. And it's interesting that many of the men who founded modern science, men like Newton, Faraday, Maxwell, they were all Bible believers. They all worshipped the God of heaven, perhaps with what we would consider to be erroneous views, but nevertheless, they saw their study of science as the study of God's works. But modern science has detached God's works from his works, I beg your pardon. It's interesting, we have a description of science, a scientist in the Bible. In Kings, it refers to Solomon. He described plant life from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. So he certainly examined the world around him as the handiwork of God. You might like to glance at a verse in the Acts of the Apostles, Acts chapter 14. Do you remember when Paul at Lystra, having healed a lame man, is worshipped as a god? And when Paul and Barnabas realise what's happening, they run in among the people. And this is what Paul says, verse 15 of Acts 14. Sirs, why do ye these things? We also are men of like passions with you, and preach unto you that ye should turn from these vanities to the living God, which made heaven and earth and the sea and all things that are therein, who in times past suffered all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he left himself not without witness, in that he did good and gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. What a testimony from the apostle, based upon God's creation, again, of the heavens and the earth and the sea, and of the things that God gives us from his good earth, those fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. Well, that's considered a naive view today. But this argument from looking at nature and seeing it as the handiwork of God is a very powerful one. And it was first sort of written down by this man, William Paley. He was a naturalist clergyman at the end of the 18th century. And he wrote a book called Natural Theology, showing how the living world demonstrates the handiwork of God. And in his famous analogy, he said, suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and you pick it up and examine it, and you find that its several parts, or its many parts, are framed for a purpose, which is to tell the time, of course. And the internals of the watch, it's got a case, it's got a glass, and of course inside are very many intricate parts, springs and levers and jewels, in order to achieve that purpose. So Paley said, the inference is inevitable that the watch must have a maker. You wouldn't imagine that it was, if you just found a stone on the ground, that had been made with any purpose. But the watch has been made with a purpose. And so he said, everything we see in nature, every manifestation of design, exists in the works of nature. And so the inference is that nature must have a designer, a maker. And it's still a powerful argument today. One of the most exuberant of nature's designs is the tail of the male peacock. And when you examine it in detail, those eyes, you see how they are made up. This is a close-up of the feather and the barbs. And if you look at each barb has a different pattern. So these barbs are green, and then this next barb has just a trace of yellow on the outside, in the middle of the barb, and then this one has yellow, and then that sort of browny orange colour, and then back to yellow, and then back to green. And then the barbs here start in the dark place. They have light blue and dark blue, Oxford and Cambridge. Cambridge and Oxford. And then, the orangey brown, and then it's built up a series of individual barbs making up that pattern, which is an eye, we see as an eye. You'll know, of course, that what you're seeing on your screen at the moment is made up from thousands of individual spots of colour, which are called pixels, and together they make up the image which you have on your screen. And you wouldn't imagine that any of those pixel colours came by accident. How could you possibly imagine that this pattern could derive by accident? Remembering, of course, even more amazingly, that the pattern to make that is encoded in the DNA of the peacock. And not just one of these eyes, but dozens of them. The world is full of examples like this of amazing design. Now, of course, the high priest of evolution is this, I call him a gentleman, Professor Dawkins. And he took up Paley's challenge in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. And he said there is a watchmaker, but the watchmaker's blind. It's natural selection. Now, natural selection is a process which Darwin described by analogy with the selection which a breeder carries out to get the best type of dog or pigeon or plant. He selects amongst the offspring the best ones and breeds those to get a good strain. And Darwin said, well, nature does the same. And that undoubtedly is true to some extent. But natural selection selects. It doesn't make anything new. What makes things new are what are described as mutations, which is essentially, we'll talk about those in a minute, essentially mistakes. And natural selection works on mutations to produce new features. But can we really believe that things like we just described in the peacock's tail could come about in that way? You see, he admits biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. That eye on the peacock's tail looks as though it's been designed for a purpose, to presumably attract the female peahen. But of course, it hasn't really. It's just come about by accident. And natural selection has selected it because it makes the peacock more attractive? Well, what he's saying actually is that chance processes can produce complex design, and that is faith. There's no evidence, you cannot show this, nobody's ever shown it in practice. He believes it because he doesn't want to believe in a designer, but it's just faith. And Mr. Dawkins despises faith. He says faith is believing in things which cannot be proved. Precisely. So looking on then to what I mentioned just now, DNA. We've all heard about it. It's this amazing molecule with tens of thousands of atoms forming a double spiral which encodes everything that is required to make living things, like the fetus in the womb. And DNA is, well, it's been described as a biological computer. It has a code, and the code makes complicated molecules called proteins from which every living thing is made. It's really got a parts list of proteins, lengths, particular lengths of the DNA provide a pattern to make different proteins. And so it's a store of information. Now, I mentioned just now that science makes the universe, describes the universe in material terms, in terms of things, stuff that you can see and touch and hold and analyze. But actually, all living things require something more than material. They require information. And information is not something you can hold in your hand. Information comes from intelligence. There's a wonderful quote by this gentleman, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft. The software I'm using on this computer is Microsoft's PowerPoint. I've no idea how it works, but I just about know enough to click the right buttons. And Bill Gates said DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. So he's comparing it with Microsoft's software like PowerPoint and many other programs and saying DNA is far more advanced than that. Now, Microsoft, obviously, like many other companies, similar companies, employ some of the most clever computer programmers in the world to produce their software and keep it up to date and improve it. But we're asked to believe that the software of DNA wrote itself, aren't we? Who wrote it? Of course, there's only one candidate. This far, far more advanced software is the product of the divine creator, the God of heaven. And that's, I think, a very powerful argument, one you can use with your friends. Who wrote the software for DNA? Something else about DNA, that it's in every one of the cells of our bodies. It's in every one of the cells of a plant or a fish or a bird or an animal. It contains the complete code for making that living thing. The DNA in our cells is approximately 2 meters long. We know it's about 2 meters, don't we, at the moment, keeping 2 meters apart. So how on earth does it get into our cells, which you can't even see without the aid of a microscope? Well, of course, it's 2 meters long, but it's exceedingly thin, much thinner than human hair. It's only a few atoms thick. So it can be folded up and rolled up. And this is how it works. So the string of DNA is in lengths which are then wound around these balls of protein, which are called nucleosomes. They're balls of protein made by the DNA, by the way, chicken and egg situation. So it's like a string of pearls on a string of pearls. I was going to say beads on a string. And those, as you see here, are then rolled up into this material, which is called chromatin. So you can see it's all tightly rolled together. I missed out these tails on the histone balls, which help control the genes. Genes can be switched on or switched off or dormant. They're switched on when they are needed to make a protein in one of your cells, and then they become dormant, or they may be switched off altogether. And the chromatin, this chromatin, is then folded up into things that can actually be seen with the naked eye, with a microscope, called chromosomes. And those chromosomes are packed into the nucleus of your cell, not just the cell itself, but inside the cell is the nucleus. What an amazing system that is, the most amazing packaging system you can imagine. And when your cell needs something in your cell needs to make a protein, it unwraps the correct length of all of that, finds the piece of DNA, copies it to make the protein, and then wraps it all up again. That's going on all the time in every one of the cells of our bodies. The complexity of what God has done is beyond description, isn't it? So let's think about our world then. We read in Psalm 148 that God 147 makes the grass to grow. Here's another one, Psalm 104. He causes grass to grow for the cattle and vegetation for the service of man, that he may bring forth food from the earth. So everything we eat ultimately starts as grass or some other form of vegetation, which is grown for us to eat or grown for the cattle, or including the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, all depend on these fundamental growing things for life. So how does that work? How does grass grow? And it brings us to this amazing process called photosynthesis. That means making things from light. Photo, light, synthesis, making. And all life essentially depends on this process, and it's going on all around you. If you can glance out the window and see the trees or the plants or the hedge in your garden, it's happening now. So here's a leaf, and in the surface of the leaf, if we blow it up and examine it under a microscope, the leaf has an upper and lower skin, a dermis, and then it has the material. I'm not a biological expert, so I'm not sure the terms of all these things, but it's these little black dots here that are key. And here they are blown up. Here is one of them. And it's called a chloroplast. And within the chloroplast, which has two membranes around the outside and a third membrane inside, are these lumps of stuff, which you are sure have heard of. It's called chlorophyll. So this is chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is the clever stuff which turns light into energy and food for the plant. So we blow up the chlorophyll. We're getting smaller and smaller. And how does chlorophyll work? Because it's so clever that if man could replicate it, it would be, well, a certain Nobel Prize. Because here's some chlorophyll. I don't know if you remember, years ago they used to put it in toothpaste. I'm not quite sure why, but not for this purpose. So here's light falling on the chlorophyll, and here's a water molecule. Well, in fact, two of them, H2O, water, and the light somehow splits the water into oxygen, which finds its way back into the atmosphere. I'm sure you know that growing things emit oxygen, which contributes to the oxygen we breathe. And it also produces electrons and hydrogen ions. It splits hydrogen off. Now, that sounds easy, doesn't it? Light splitting water. Well, we can't do it. You can split water into oxygen and hydrogen with electricity. That's called electrolysis. But that, of course, requires the electricity. It takes quite a lot of electricity to split water. You can make hydrogen, because hydrogen is desirable as the perfect fuel. Forget petrol and electric cars and all that. If you could make a car or a train or a plane which ran on hydrogen, when it burns, it just turns back to water. So there's no pollution. But hydrogen at the moment is made from natural gas, which is not an ecologically friendly approach. So how does the chlorophyll do it? And only, 2004 was it discovered the catalyst. A catalyst is a complicated molecule which does the job without being used up itself. So here's the catalyst in chlorophyll. Here it's the two water molecules, and it's when they attach to this molecule, the energy of the molecule splits them, as you see, uses the light energy to split them into oxygen and hydrogen. And this molecule has an atom of calcium. It has 4 atoms of oxygen and 4 atoms of manganese. I wonder how many of you have actually heard of the element manganese. It's not sort of an everyday term, is it, that we're familiar with. Manganese is an element. It's actually a metal, very similar to iron. And your life and mine depend on it. It's in every living leaf that you can see, every blade of grass. So is all that nature's invention, or is that intelligent design? It took some of the top chemists in the world to work out what this molecule was, and yet we're asked to say that nature created it. Just by a series of happy coincidences, this molecule came into being. So there's life depending on photosynthesis. And I'm going to look now just at some examples. I've talked, if you've heard me on this before, you may have heard of some of these, so I apologise, but I just take examples from the living world that fascinate me. And the first one is this wonderful seabird, the gannet. It's a very large seabird, and it's what's known as a plunge diver. It cruises over the ocean looking for shoals of fish. It's a superb glider, and when it sees them, it dives into the sea. And as you can see in that time-lapse picture, it folds itself up so that just before it hits the water at something like 60 or 70 miles an hour, it's totally streamlined. Otherwise, it would probably knock itself out or do some serious damage. So it's a superb glider. It has a whole series of adaptations which fit it for this particular way of feeding. So you may know many birds have their eyes at the side, so they've got two different views of the world, but the gannet has binocular vision. You can see how it streamlines itself. There are protective membranes which come over the eyes to protect it from the impact of the water. Its nostrils are inside its bill, so they're protected from the water, and its jaws close very tight so that no water can enter the bill as it hits the water. And then it has across its breast and the front of its wings many air sacs which cushion the impact. And it has a reinforced bill. Now, you might say, well, any one of those might have come about by accident and been selected for by natural selection. But any one of them is useless without all the others. It's a whole design package. All those things need to be there for the gannet to prosper and feed in that way. So how did all those things come together? Who was the designer? That's a bird. Let's go to an insect. The world of insects is absolutely fascinating, and the lifestyles of many of them are so complex. And we know that insects have brains the size, well, smaller than a pinhead, and they are programmed to do amazing things. There was a brother in Australia sent me the details of the possum wasp. That was the first time I came across this. He had one building its pot underneath his kitchen windowsill. As you can see, it's the female wasp who builds pots from mud, which are produced by its saliva and moisture and clay and sand and so on. Now, you wouldn't imagine that a creature as small and humble as a wasp would be able to plan for the future. But that's what the female wasp does. When she's been impregnated, she builds this pot. And the pot is going to be a larder for her offspring. And what she does is she finds caterpillars of other insects and paralyzes them with her sting, with her venom. She doesn't kill them, but she paralyzes them so that their development is amazingly frozen. They can't develop anymore. They don't die and they just stay alive. She places them in the nest cell, and then she lays her eggs in the bodies of these caterpillars, and that's her finish. She dies. So in due course, the eggs hatch and the wasp larvae feed from inside the caterpillars, which I suppose sounds a bit gruesome. And in fact, Charles Darwin said concerning parasitic wasps like this, that he could not conceive that a loving God would create a creature which lived and benefited by eating another one from the inside. That's a bit sort of soft, isn't it? I don't imagine the caterpillars have large brains to realise they're being eaten from the inside. And in fact, these parasitic wasps form an important control of pest species which would otherwise multiply much too fast. They're all part of the wonderful balance of nature, ecology as it's called today. But Darwin's comment depends on his view of what a loving God would do. You find a lot of this. A loving God shouldn't allow suffering, and this sort of argument. It's telling God what he ought to be like. Well, we know God is a God of love, but he's also a God of judgment and of severity as well. So I can only deduce myself that the forethought in this insect is programmed into it by the creator. It's in the Wasp's software. The Wasp couldn't possibly think ahead and say, well, I've got 5 mouths to feed, I better get some food in and put it in a larder. Let's move to plants. Here's a wonderful plant of the rainforest. I like to tell the story that I spent 2 weeks trudging through the Borneo jungle to photograph this, but actually, of course, I photographed it in the tropical house at Birmingham Botanic Gardens. And the pitcher plant is one of these plants which feeds on insects. You've all probably heard of the sundew and similar. But the pitcher is a pitcher of a fluid which dissolves the bodies of insects and provides the nitrogen and other elements required by the plant. And in fact, it wasn't until scientists actually studied them in the jungle that they realized just how clever it is. So this pitcher is a specially adapted leaf hanging from a leaf stalk, and it's got a lid up here, and the lid produces nectar which attracts its prey, which is primarily ants. So the ants are attracted, they crawl onto the lid and eventually onto the pitcher itself. Now, when the pitcher is dry, it's perfectly safe for the ants to walk on it. It's only when it rains, and this was what was discovered by seeing it in the rainforest environment, that when it rains, that surface becomes lethally slippery. So the ants get used to crawling around on it, but when it rains, they lose their grip and fall into the pitcher. And the walls of the pitcher have a special waxy material so that there is no possibility of the ants climbing back out again. And so they drown in the fluid and are digested by the plant. Perhaps Mr. Darwin didn't think that's not a very nice way for an ant to die. Sorry, I'm being cynical. So it's the intermittent action of the rain on the plant that provides the element of surprise. So once again, it's a design package, intricate in its outworking, quite amazing to contemplate. Now, one of my favourite creatures is the cuttlefish, which again I read about in New Scientist magazine. And the article I read about was how the cuttlefish evolved its skin. You can see the skin here with this amazing pattern on it. What you can't see is that pattern is not fixed. It's a fluid pattern that moves, and the cuttlefish can change it in an instant. Those lines can move and flow and jiggle about and take many different colours and even different shapes and forms. The cuttlefish is not actually a fish. It's a mollusk. Most mollusks have their bones on the outside. They're like snails and creatures like that. Squid, also jellyfish. They're all sort of related creatures. You may have seen the internal bone of the cuttlefish. Pick one up on the beach. Bird keepers put them in the cages for the birds to nibble to get their calcium. The article claimed that an unfortunate mutation had turned the cuttlefish inside out, so that it no longer had the protection of a shell. And so it had evolved this amazing skin coloration in order to camouflage itself. It didn't say how the million or few years that it took to evolve that skin system, what it did for protection in the interim to avoid being made extinct by predators. One of the things it can do is to blend into the background for camouflage, and it can also avoid predators, confuse its prey, and use it for display, for communication. Now, here's a picture of a cuttlefish in camouflage. You can just about make out the shape. You can see how it's totally changed its colour. I think this is a coral reef. This is broken bits of coral. Not only does it colour itself like the coral, but the skin texture has also changed. It's got lumps and bumps, as though it is a piece of coral. How on earth does it do that? The scientists believe that cuttlefish are colour blind. So how do they make their skin match almost instantly? So now you see it, now you don't. Absolutely wonderful. If you're interested, go onto YouTube and search for cuttlefish, and there's lovely videos of them actually doing their stuff and changing colour. Marvellous creatures. So we've seen a bird, we've seen a plant, we've seen an insect, and we've seen a marine creature. But of course, the supreme example of creation is us. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And I'm sure we know the words from Psalm 139. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. I am made. I didn't just happen. Just as an aside, I believe that psalm is really talking about the Lord Jesus Christ and his reforming in the resurrection, but it certainly still applies to us. And Paul, the words we've already mentioned in Acts chapter 17 on Mars Hill in Athens, that God gives to all life and breath and all things, and has made from one blood all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth. A fact which men are still very reluctant to believe, and racism and colour prejudice, as we know, is still alive and flourishing in our world. I just thought I would pick out one organ in the body, which is an amazing organ. And it's actually the largest organ in the body. To a live audience, not implying that you're not alive, but when I can speak to the audience, I ask them to tell me what organ they think it is. And most people say the skin. Well, that's the largest in area, but it's not internal. The largest internal organ is the liver. And most of us are never aware of our livers. I don't think we even think about them unless we're ill. You might not even know where it is. Well, there it is, just under the right-hand side of your diaphragm at the bottom of your chest. And when we look at the construction of the liver, it's an extraordinary thing. I can only very quickly summarize it with my imperfect knowledge. This is the aorta bringing fresh oxygenated blood from the heart, and it's split off into the liver so that the liver gets a fresh supply of oxygen. You can follow, I think, the red blood vessels carrying it to all parts of the liver, to the liver cells, which are called hepatocytes, from the Greek word for the liver. Another supply of blood is in this light blue one, which brings blood with nutrients from the intestines. So when you've eaten a meal and it's being digested, those chemicals, proteins and minerals and vitamins in the food are sent into the liver by the hepatic artery. And then, so you get oxygen and nutrients sent to all the cells of the liver, which then processes them and stores what are needed to be stored. It's been estimated that the liver has around 500 different functions. It produces proteins, which it then feeds back into the bloodstream via the hepatic vein. So this is the return flow going back into the circulation, carrying proteins, hormones, minerals that are needed by the cells of the rest of the body. Things that need to be stored are stored in the liver. So, for instance, when you eat a meal and you get energy, glucose is converted into glucose. Glucose is stored in the liver as something called glycogen, which can return glucose to the bloodstream when it's required. You don't want all the energy at once and then it's gone till you have another meal. So the liver stores it and recirculates it as required. So an amazing array of processes which it carries out. And it's also the body's toxin remover. You know, you can get these diets which are supposed to detoxify your body, but the liver actually does it for you. But be warned, it doesn't do very well with alcohol, as the well-known disease. It damages the liver, excess alcohol, and you get cirrhosis. So, fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, we've talked in the liver processes these things via the blood. And of course, we know that Scripture says that the life is in the blood. It is that essential fluid which links all the different parts of the body, circulates and carries all those materials around that the liver processes. And just briefly talk about how it does it, because this to me is absolutely amazing. So in your bloodstream, there are millions of these red blood cells. And the function of the red blood cells is to collect oxygen from the lungs and transfer it to the cells of the body that need it. And as I dare say you know, the hemoglobin molecule, which is illustrated here, uses iron. That's why we need iron in our diet, because it's going to use iron to collect the oxygen. Iron likes oxygen. We've almost forgotten actually, but our motor cars nowadays don't go rusty. But when I started driving a car, they went rusty at the drop of a hat, I should say. The whole ownership of a car was a battle to stop them going rusty. Iron likes oxygen. So how can iron collect oxygen from the lungs and then release it to the cells when it gets to them? Why doesn't it just hang on to the oxygen like rust does on iron? And the answer is that the iron groups that you see, this says heme group, it's a little molecule surrounding an iron atom. So the little red balls there are 4 of them, are iron atoms. And each atom is held inside this spiral chain of protein called a polypeptide. So there are 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. And so you have 4 iron atoms, and each iron atom can hang on to 1 oxygen molecule. But the way that it's constructed, the oxygen molecule can get close to the iron, but it can't form a bond with it, which would be unbreakable. So isn't that clever? The oxygen molecule heads for the iron. It can't quite get there, but it's held there until it gets to a cell which is lacking oxygen, and then it releases it. And its place is taken by carbon dioxide molecule, which is going to be taken back to the lungs for you to breathe out, to expel. I mean, that's a very crude description of a very marvellous process. Well, the most amazing organ of all, of course, is our brain. If you see a picture of a brain, it's difficult to believe that this few pounds of squidgy grey material actually contain every thought you've ever had, every emotion, every piece of consciousness, awareness of the world you're in. It enables you to think, to speak, to listen, to see, to hear, and do all the things that we do. And it's all here in our heads. It took a long time for humans to realize that that was where it all came from. And within all those folds of the brain, there are 100 billion nerve cells. They're called neurons. They are the things which do the work. We've no idea how. How is it that a collection of little cells which are altered in some way, together they can make a memory of what you did yesterday, or can enable you to see what's on your screen and interpret it and read words and understand them and so on. And those 100 billion neurons aren't just sitting there, they're interconnected with other neurons in connections, and the number of connections runs into trillions. That's millions of millions. So when you make a memory, a certain number of neurons send out little links and connect into other neurons and form a network. And if you refresh it, you keep making that memory, then you remember it permanently. But if it's only there for a little while, then the connections will break and you forget. Of course, at the age of some of us, the forgettery is overtaking the memory. When you eat your tea, 20% of the energy that you gain from your tea will be devoted to the work of the brain. So you can have an extra bit if you really fancy it, which is an extraordinary percentage, isn't it? 1/5 of the energy that you take in goes to servicing the cells of the brain. And it is, of course, the seat of that mysterious property called consciousness, which scientists argue endlessly over. Where does consciousness come from? How is it that we can make memories? How is it that we can understand? How is it that we can be aware that there is a God? And we know where the consciousness comes from. This is the property that God has given to us when he breathed into our nostrils the breath of life. This is spirit, if you like, the spirit of man, which is able to respond to the spirit of God. And so, although the world doesn't recognize it, the most important nutrient of the brain is the word of God. The most important nutrient, the most important thing we can feed our brains with. Wonderful life. Wherever we look, everything that God has made is wonderful. And Job captured that when he said, ask the beast, ask the animals, ask the birds of the air, ask the insects, speak to the earth, and it will teach you that the hand of the Lord has done this, in whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. So I hope you've found that interesting. I hope you found it inspiring as I do, to see and to think about how wonderful the things of God are. But it's not quite the end, is it? Because we've been talking about this life. And as Brother Jeff referred to in his introduction, there is a life to come, the life of the new creation. Christ, being raised from the dead, dieth no more. We are subject still to mortality. Our cells are dying all the time. But death has no more dominion over him. And that is the wonderful hope that is set before us. This is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life. And I will raise him up at the last day. If this life is wonderful, how wonderful will the life to come be? And so we long and pray for that day when our Lord will come, he who has promised and said, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And he that liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Amen.